Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. This afternoon, we are covering the extradition hearing for Bryan Kohberger that is going to take place in the Monroe County Courthouse in Pennsylvania at around 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. Now, I do have to tell you that there are no cameras allowed in that courtroom, but what we are going to try to do is show you what is happening outside of the courthouse. And of course, we'll report back to you the latest information as we get it. Now, the 28-year-old grad student from Washington State University was arrested and named a suspect in the University of Idaho student murders case last Friday. As you know, 4 students are believed to have been stabbed to death in the early morning hours of November 13th, likely asleep at the time. Law and Crime has been on top of this case from the very beginning, with correspondent Sierra Gillespie at the hearing now and reporter Anjanette Levy also live in Idaho. Now, before I introduce my panel and get into some of our viewer questions, again, we would love for you to submit questions to us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We'll try our best to answer them here on the air. Here is a report from Sierra herself.
The suspected University of Idaho murderer will appear in front of a judge and the world today in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. Suspect 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger will appear this afternoon for an extradition hearing. As Law and Crime Network reported, Kohberger was arrested in the early morning hours of Friday at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. That's not far from where we are here in Monroe County, but more recently, Kohberger was a PhD candidate at Washington State University. His apartment there in Washington State is not a far drive from the University of Idaho or the off-campus home where 4 students were found brutally stabbed to death back in November. For weeks, we had little information about that case. No leads, no suspects, and really no information except that investigators were searching for a white Hyundai Elantra. We can now confirm that a white Elantra was seized during the investigation at Kohberger's parents' house. Speaking of Kohberger's parents, we're also learning that Kohberger's father recently flew from Pennsylvania over to Washington to drive with his son cross-country back here to the East Coast. During that more than 2,000-mile road trip, Kohberger's father said he didn't notice anything suspicious or off about his son. Kohberger's family, though, has since released a statement saying they send their remorse to the family members of the victims and that they're hoping this can play out in the legal system. As for Kohberger's public defender, he says his client hopes to soon be exonerated and that he is not fighting extradition. He also reminds the public that Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty and that this should not be tried in the court of public opinion. So what can we expect from this extradition hearing this afternoon? Kohberger will appear in front of a judge at about 3:30, and the hearing isn't expected to be very long. He isn't fighting the extradition, meaning he could be back in Idaho as early as this evening. After that, Kohberger will appear in front of a Latah County judge, and it's then that a now sealed affidavit will likely be unsealed. Then we will likely learn more information about the investigation and what led up to Kohberger's arrest. For now, though, we will continue to follow this ever-developing case, bringing you the latest details as they unfold. Reporting in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Sierra Gillespie, Law and Crime Network.
All right, great reporting there by Sierra. I'm joined right now this hour by Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy, who is outside the Latah County Courthouse. I'm also joined by retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who's been following this case from the beginning, and criminologist Dr. Debbie Goodman. It's great to have you all here. I'd like to get right into the viewer questions from social media, YouTube, because people have an interest in this case. Anjanette, I'm going to start with you. This is from Sway from YouTube. I'm actually going to read you Sway's question and then hit you with a question of my own. So the first question from Sway is, when is the trial likely to take place? I'll tell you, probably not for quite some time. The question I will pose to you is, will there be cameras allowed in Idaho for these proceedings as they progress?
Well, Jesse, I think that it would be a very, very long time. I mean, we haven't even seen Bryan Kohberger served with the complaint in this case. That won't happen until he arrives back in Idaho. So we are a long, long way away from a trial if this case even gets that far. And it appears it may, because he is maintaining his innocence at this point in time. So it could take years, actually. Think about the amount of discovery, the evidence that would have to be turned over in this case. It would be voluminous, with 300 police interviews, reams of video footage that were turned over to police, crime lab results, crime scene photos, all kinds of things that would need to be turned over. And I was saying earlier, I think it would be terabytes of evidence and information that would be turned over. You know, we're here at the courthouse in Latah County, Jesse, and this is where Bryan Kohberger would make his initial appearance. And the jail is here as well. So we're a long way away from a trial, of course. But, you know, it's going to take a long time, I think, for this case to make its way through the courts. And I forgot your second question, Jesse, if you could just hit me
it
with
was
that
about
again.
if there's going to be cameras allowed. Are we going to see anything as this progresses in Idaho?
Oh, right. Well, we certainly hope so, at least for the initial appearance. And cameras are allowed in the courtrooms in Idaho, but there is some wording in the statute that allows for the judge, if he or she sees fit, to bar cameras from the courtroom. We saw that happen in the Daybell case in another part of Idaho. We're hoping that doesn't happen in this case. This is a case that has tremendous public interest, not only here in the United States, but overseas as well. So we certainly hope that cameras will be allowed in the courtroom throughout this case.
Jennifer, let me go to you. I'm going to preface this question that we have from Atharia from YouTube in the sense that there's so much we don't officially know, right? There's been reports about how he was apprehended, the use of DNA, the use of genealogical websites like we've seen in the Jerry Burns case and the Golden State Killer. So let me just preface that with we still don't have confirmation on how he was positively identified. But having said that, the question we have from Atharia from YouTube is, how could the defense team challenge the genealogy connection in this case?
Well, they could challenge it if, as an example, he was actually there at that location for a party or was in there for some other reason. So they could possibly say that, listen, of course his DNA was there. He was there on another occasion. And I think that that is the biggest concern that personally I have as this case plays out.
So, Dr. Debbie Goodman, I go to you now. Again, this is pure speculation at this point, but people have a lot of questions. Let's say, you know, again, we don't know the evidence against him, but this is from Goofy Girl from YouTube, which I will say, not a goofy question. The question from Goofy Girl is, any chance he'll plead guilty? This is the part that I find interesting. Do these types ever do that? So, assuming he actually did do that, have your experience with someone in this case plead guilty to this?
Yes, thank you, Jesse, for that question and from the viewer who submitted it. So I feel strongly that he will not plead guilty. Why? Because even a most recent statement that he made to his public defender, and the statement from this suspect is that, oh, I am certain I will be exonerated. Well, to say that type of verbiage for me as a criminologist is very different than saying I'm certain that I'm innocent, I didn't do this crime. So because of his knowledge, even as a PhD student, these become very intense, immersive types of academic programs. So I believe, knowing now of his intellect and his background, he has something in his back pocket that potentially he thinks, through his reading, through his research, all of the planning and premeditation and decision making that had to go into this atrocity, I do not see him pleading guilty.
Yeah, I mean, the question of why has come up so much, you know, speculating about his background and what may have let him do this, the connection between him and the victims. We have a question, Anjanette, from Be a Shiner, Not a Whiner from YouTube. I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people out there. When will law enforcement release the 911 call? Now, of course, this is the 911 call from one of the surviving roommates. And of course, the garbage truck right in the background as Anjanette is, I'm asking this question.
Right.
So in case you couldn't hear me, the question is, when will law enforcement release the 911 call?
Well, we're not sure, but we do know for sure that it is trash day here in Moscow, Idaho, but we really don't know. When I had spoken to Aaron Snell a couple of weeks ago, last month actually, when we were here in Idaho, he felt that it could be released sooner rather than later. He didn't have a date or a timeline for that. But, you know, I spoke to him the week of December 5th when I did a pretty extensive interview with him, and he thought it could be possibly released at some point. So it hasn't been released right now. We're hoping maybe after this complaint is unsealed, it will be. But you have to think maybe there were details on that call from the roommates and the other person on the call that maybe showed they were details that maybe only the killer would know. And that is the only reason I could think that that call hadn't been released at this time. We know how close to the vest Moscow police have been holding everything. They've played this they've played it the way it should be played. There haven't really been any leaks. When we've heard about leaks, I think it's come from other sources. So as far as this investigation goes here in Moscow, we're hoping that 911 call will be released at some point. We just don't have a time when, but I will ask about that again.
And we wonder, how much will the probable cause affidavit ultimately show about the arrest? It's going to have a lot of details, but maybe not all the details that people are asking for. And Jennifer, we have a question from Laura Wright on YouTube. Do we know if parts of the probable cause affidavit will be redacted? And I'll ask you, if that's the case, what do you think would be redacted?
It's possible. Anytime there are witness statements, they often redact any names. So I would expect and anticipate any names of witnesses that could be involved in that affidavit to be redacted.
All right, I'll tell you what, we're going to take more of your questions. We're eagerly anticipating the extradition hearing, although unfortunately, as I said, there will be no cameras allowed in that hearing, but we will report back to you the latest information as we get it. And of course, we are going to take more of your questions. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We're still following the University of Idaho murder case. 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger has his extradition hearing today in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. He was arrested Friday in connection to the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 college students who were found dead in November of last year. And we're taking your viewer questions right now from social media and YouTube. A lot of people have questions about what's going to happen next in this process, and we do want to hear from you. But first up, before we get to more questions, I do want to play a portion of something that you might not have seen. This is from the attorney for victim Kaylee Gonsalves' family. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think everybody was relieved. The family was relieved, and you know, it's long from over. The next, you know, that chapter's kind of closed at least, and then now the next chapter starts. You know, the whole criminal justice process, and so I think everyone had a little bit of relief and was able maybe to sleep at night, and then now it's back to the grind again. So we had no idea. They hadn't released any information, had no heads up about anything. I think I received a call on. It was about 10:30, I think, on Thursday night, and from the Moscow Police Department, letting me know that they were in the process of taking someone into custody. They didn't release the name or any of that information to us that night. I immediately called the family and spoke with them. They were obviously, you know, happy and relieved to a certain degree. And then I got more information, more details about who the defendant was in the case the next morning.
All right, I'm back here with my A-list panel. Dr. Debbie Goodman, our criminologist on the panel. I'm going to go to more viewer questions. Before we do, I just want to ask a question of my own to you. You know, the minute it came out that he's this graduate student for criminology and criminal justice, and he's attending Washington State University, I don't know what people were first thinking of, whether or not this is somebody, again, pure speculation, but whether or not he had this fascination in crime. What was his connection to what seemingly could have been complete strangers? He apparently was taught by by Catherine Ramsland at one point. What is your theories? Or let me put it this way. What are you hoping to learn from him? Or what are you hoping to learn about this case, about if he's the one who did this, potential motives?
Sure. So I can tell you, Jesse, and our viewers, I've had the pleasure and privilege of serving as a professor in the state of Florida at 3 universities for 27 years. And the individuals with whom I have interacted, my students have gone on to contribute in such great manner. And at whatever point I may have met them, interacted with them, taught them, whether it's a 2-year program in academics and crime, law, and justice, or the 4-year programs, the master's degrees, and certainly at the doctoral level, that these are men and women who are so devoted, dedicated, conscientious in our field, and make extraordinary contributions at local police departments, at state agencies, federal, FBI, DEA, Customs Marshals, Secret Service, Homeland Security. So when I initially heard about who this individual is and the level of intellect, I actually think that because of his background, his research, his knowledge, that will be an important aspect for the prosecution, to show that there would be limited mitigating conditions, to show that it was with planning, premeditation, it was willful, it was with malice. He would know all of this. And it will be extraordinary when the investigators, even as we speak, start to take a look at what primarily was he researching and why. So I have no doubt that this level of knowledge that he would have acquired up to this point meant that he knew exactly what he was doing. You know, we call it mens rea, actus reus, criminal mind and then criminal action. For me, both sides of the coin have been checked off thus far.
So, Anjanette, let me go to you right now. We have questions about the blood that was found at the crime scene. This is from Carla Dunham from YouTube. You know how there was blood outside the window? I often wonder if that was his blood somehow. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of people believe that what we saw on the wall outside of the home was blood. We weren't able to really get confirmation on that. I was told by somebody it could be rust, but it certainly looked like blood. I don't know what that was, or if it was his blood or belonging to someone else. But it was interesting to me that it was still there for quite some time on that concrete wall. kind of shocking to see something like that. So we really just don't know if it was his or not. We do know, and we should, I couch all of this with the fact that he is maintaining his innocence at this point in time. And, there hasn't been a trial yet. He hasn't even appeared here in Idaho for this case. So we need to keep that in mind. But I don't think that, say, somebody was leaving a home, that blood would be left in that pattern. And even though I'm not a blood spatter expert, I don't think it would be left like that, because it looked like something that had kind of dripped down from the home, possibly under the siding. Just my thought.
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So in our system, you are innocent until proven guilty. And I think it's important to remember that, because, Jennifer, two of our questions are almost related. We have Chris Dahl from YouTube. What if he really is innocent? Well, he is innocent until proven guilty, as I said. So the question is, what if he's really innocent? But I'm also going to throw this to you, Jennifer. This is from McNamara Dawn F from YouTube. What are the chances that the suspect isn't guilty if he was found not guilty after being convicted in the press? How does he come back from that?
Well, this individual would have a very difficult time coming back from that, because no matter what, a great majority of this nation would probably believe that he indeed committed these crimes. He has certainly been charged. And so we know in a court of law, they have found probable cause to believe he is guilty. Now, that doesn't rise to the standard necessary for conviction, obviously, but I think it would leave many believing, no matter whether he's exonerated or not, that he would have been somehow involved in this.
Yeah, and people are fascinated about the legal process that's going to progress now and what the evidence will be. We go to a question here from Tracy from YouTube. Dr. Goodman, I'll throw this to you. If DNA evidence is found in Bryan's car, that Kia Elantra that everybody was talking about, they were searching for, if it was found in Bryan's car, but he had his car serviced before his road trip or after the road trip, could that potentially pose problems for the prosecution?
It's a good question, but I think if there is blood in there, it is pointing with a red blinking, light toward him, the suspect. These are the possibilities, but as a criminologist, I like to go with probability and data analytics. DNA is our best friend, as we like to say in the field of crime, law, and justice. And the probabilities are so huge and enormous that when there is a connectivity between the individual suspect and our victims, that alone is very, huge evidence.
And Jeanette, again, I said people are fascinated with the legal process. We have a question from Mikalvano S from Twitter. What is a rough timeline of how the court process will happen? Are we looking at years or months? And I'll just add this, I don't think Anjanette is going to be down there for years or months, but she is going to probably be covering this the best that she possibly can. What are we looking at in terms of a timeline?
I think the entire process from, initial appearance to indictment to, carrying this through to a possible trial, through a trial, it could take years. There's a lot of evidence in this case. We don't yet know exactly who is going to represent Bryan Kohberger, other than it will be a public defender. There are 4 people in Latah County who are contracted to handle public defender work. They don't have a statewide state public defender system here in Idaho. And 2 of those people can't represent him. One being the coroner, Kathy Mabbitt. She's conflicted out, as is another lawyer who's under contract in her office. So that leaves 2 other lawyers here in Latah County, and I've looked them up, and they do not appear, the other 2 lawyers, the 2 women, do not appear to be death certified or qualified, at least, to handle a death penalty case, according to what I've seen on the web. So there are just a certain number of people, I guess, here in Idaho, a certain number of attorneys who are, death certified or death qualified. That means that they have whatever certifications or credentials they need to handle a death penalty case. So it could take a long time, and I think he's obviously going to have more than one lawyer. He will hopefully have a team to represent his interests.
It's interesting you talk about Kathy Mabbitt, because this is somebody who, when you interviewed Shannon Gray a couple weeks ago, he was awfully critical of the idea of the coroner making statements about the autopsy results, and this is somebody else who's conflicted, who also has this job as an attorney as well. So it was interesting to hear him talk about that. Jennifer, I want to pose a question to you about communication in this case. One of the things that I found so interesting before the arrest of Kohberger was the statements from law enforcement, what, a day, 2 days before this happened, saying, look, we have no publicly identifiable suspect. We're still asking for information from the public. And I'll never forget what Chief Fry said in an interview. He said, look, we don't want to release the 911 phone call. We don't want to provide more information because we do not want to taint a future prosecution. We want to get the green light from the prosecutor's office. And that kind of rang in my head. That's a standard answer, but also he could have said, we don't want to say anything, we don't want to release anything to taint the investigation. It makes me wonder how early on they knew about Kohberger.
No, I agree. I think it was earlier in that week. There was a point that there was a complete change in demeanor, a confidence that exuded from the chief. There was that comment that you just talked about where he referred to the prosecutor can handle that. That was a flag. I thought another flag was the clearing of the crime scene where they wanted to have that cleaned and so forth. I thought that that was sort of strange timing. But I equated it to their statements that they didn't have any sort of suspect in mind. So there were definitely some indications. I totally agree with you on that. And I think they learned in and around the early part of that week.
So we have another interesting question here, Dr. Goodman, from Naz Nadoz from YouTube. Does anyone think he's going to represent himself? Clearly, a lot of people think that knew him said he's actually believed he is the smartest person in the room. You've talked about his intelligence. Obviously, we don't know any indication that he would do that. But if you follow this line of speculation right now, and people believe, well, he's a criminology student, maybe he thought he could get away with it. Again, is this somebody in your experience, high-profile crime, multiple murders? They might decide to represent themselves.
Right. Great question and a very intriguing conversation, that alone. So I believe that this suspect is indeed with grandiosity. He thinks he's the smartest person in the room, narcissistic, and I will also say hedonistic. When we look at these killers, Jesse, whether it's the mass murderer, mass shooter, serial murderer, school-based related, workplace related, these individuals, many of whom will derive pleasure, hence the hedonism from beginning, middle, until the end of the atrocity. So I have no doubt that he would have derived, pleasure in calculating this, in carrying it out, and now the entire world knows who he is. However, to the direct question, I do not believe he will represent himself. I think he will be very forthcoming, very talkative, very involved in his own defense, but I don't see him at this moment in time representing himself.
All right. Well, we're going to take more of your questions. And again, I encourage everyone, if you have questions, you have theories, comments you want to make, submit them to us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We'll do our best to read them here on the air. And again, we are waiting for more updates on this extradition hearing. Again, it's a hearing to determine, and we believe that he has waived his extradition, for him to physically be moved, transported from Pennsylvania to Idaho, where he awaits those charges. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, everybody. We're still following the University of Idaho murder case. Specifically, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger has his extradition hearing starting in any minute in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. No cameras allowed, but our own Sierra Gillespie is on the ground there. She can report back to us as soon as she can on updates about what is happening. Now, again, Kohberger was arrested on Friday in connection to the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 college students who were found dead in November of last year. We're taking viewer questions right now from social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. But before we get into more of your questions, let's hear again from the attorney for victim Kaylee Gonsalves' family, Shannon Gray.
I mean, they don't need to. I mean, they haven't reached out to us to set up a meeting or anything. You know, I'm obviously a criminal defense attorney myself, and a former prosecutor. So I've explained to them how the process goes, and what the hearings might entail, and how that's going to be playing out, and how we'll just kind of take it day by day. You know, everyone thinks that I think that he's going to get back here and he's going to automatically be arraigned on the case, and that's just not what's going to happen. His first appearance will probably be getting an attorney. So get either a court-appointed attorney, or if someone, you know, if the family hires an attorney, a privately retained attorney, and then that attorney's going to want a couple days to talk with his client, and then they'll have the preliminary hearing regarding the probable cause for the arrest, and then obviously the Latah County will have to get a grand jury for the indictment, and he can be arraigned on an information prior to the indictment and be held on that. And then, so I mean, there's a lot of moving process things that are going on that aren't going to happen immediately on the case. So
let me bring back in our A-Star panel that we have with us. I'm also joined again by Anjanette Levy, who's outside the Latah County Courthouse. Now, Anjanette, you conducted that interview with Shannon Gray. What else did he have to say about the family and the update with this arrest of Bryan Kohberger?
Well, the family is relieved. Shannon Gray said it was around 10:30 last Thursday night when he received the call from the Moscow Police Department telling him that they were in the process of taking somebody into custody. He, of course, relayed that information immediately to Steve and Christy Gonsalves. They're relieved, but it doesn't change the fact that they've lost their daughter, that they are going to be mourning her and grieving the loss of their daughter, Kaylee, and of Maddie, of course, who was her very good friend, like a sister to her, for years to come, for the rest of their lives. You know, losing a child, they say, is it's the hardest thing that can happen to you in life. So they're grieving, but they're looking forward to this process. It's literally like a new chapter in a book, or a new volume in a book that will start unfolding. They're going to have to learn how to navigate this court process, come here to the Latah County Courthouse, and, you know, attend these hearings. And they have other children. You know, Kaylee was one of several children, so they still have younger children who are younger than Kaylee that they are raising and caring for. So the family is just doing the best that they can at this point in time. He also said they really had no heads up about this. They weren't being given any information. I think some of us, you know, Jennifer in the last block had mentioned, you know, some red flags. I think a lot of us were kind of seeing those red flags, and we were hearing something might be coming, and we were seeing that Chief Fry looked optimistic in those videos, even though they weren't saying anything, and we kind of had a feeling. But the family apparently had no idea that this was coming.
It's unimaginable to think about their position, although this is a glimmer of good news for them that they might have an answer moving forward. Jennifer Coffindaffer, want to go to you. We have 2 questions that are kind of related. I think they're really fascinating. We believe that the defendant is going to waive extradition, and this might be a relatively short hearing. So the question we have from Ghetto Intellect from YouTube: why waive extradition? Legal fees? And also from Yasmin M from YouTube: do you believe not fighting extradition could be strategic? Time is valuable for him to build his case, considering he does not have access to a public defender in Idaho.
Well, I think he waived extradition for 2 reasons. First of all, it's really a formality. It's nothing more than an identity hearing. And secondarily, I think it makes him look in the posture of cooperating, of I'm innocent. I'm, you know, getting down the road with this case. And I think that that's the picture that he wants to paint to the public. a sign of his innocence. So for those two reasons, it was sort of a no-brainer, if you will, to waive this hearing.
Now, again, something I have to mention at all times is he is innocent until proven guilty. As much as the public wants to, go after and hang him, we do have a system here, and it's important to remember what that system is. We've talked about it earlier, that as frustrating as it can be for the families involved and as frustrating for a lot of people online, everybody's entitled to their rights, and so there is a way that the system is going to work. I just preface that because Dr. Goodman, one of the questions that we have from Junior Dixels from YouTube, this guy trying to claim insanity. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the question and I like the topic. I'll just briefly remind the viewers who are already adept at what this is about. But for somebody to be legally insane, two things have to happen.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Goodman, I should mention this too. Yes. My understanding is in Idaho, there is no insanity defense, but let's just assume otherwise. Keeping that in mind when we think about insanity, I'll allow you to take it from there.
Sure, thank you. But again, just for that basic knowledge and understanding moving forward, it does relate to two things: that the individual didn't know what he was doing, and the individual didn't know what he was doing is wrong. So if this suspect does turn out to be guilty of this atrocity, then I would also refer back to the knowledge that he has already, acquired and doing his own, I'm sure, deep dive potentially into what this is all about. I feel that he did know what he was doing. He knew what he was doing is wrong if and when he will be found guilty.
Jennifer, Katrina Campbell from YouTube asks, can they hook him up to a lie detector machine to find out where the knife is? Because the murder weapon hasn't been recovered.
So no, he can't be forced to take a polygraph test. And the polygraph tests have been found to be unreliable, and they're not accepted in a court of law as evidentiary. So neither can he be forced to. But this is interesting. It's possible that his team, whoever his defense team ends up being, could conduct a polygraph test and could submit those results, especially if they are in his favor, to the prosecution as a move toward exculpatory or showing some exculpatory evidence. So I've seen that done before, and it can be done that way.
And by the way, a lack of a murder weapon doesn't mean you can't prosecute somebody, but it is an impediment at times to a successful prosecution. If you want to go after somebody, you want all the evidence you can possibly have. Having the murder weapon would have helped so much. Now, it is still early in this case. Something could be discovered, but again, not finding it directly is obviously an issue of concern. We want to go to a question here to you, Anjanette, from Nicole Grunwald from YouTube. Will the affidavit, the probable cause affidavit, the arrest, be made available to the public tonight?
Not tonight. I would say more than likely not, unless Bryan Kohberger somehow gets here before midnight and is served with the paperwork, and even then we would likely not get it then. But Bill Thompson, the district, well, I shouldn't say district attorney, that's not his title, prosecutor here in Latah County, said during the press conference announcing the arrest that under Idaho state law, Bryan Kohberger has to be back here in Idaho before he can be served with that complaint charging him with murder and felony burglary. Until then, it has to remain sealed. That means we don't get to see it until after Bryan Kohberger has seen it. So hopefully shortly after he arrives here in Idaho, he will be served with that paperwork. And then we all, the public, would like to see that. It sounded to me from the press conference last Friday that they want the public to know. They want the public to see this information. It's just that legally right now they can't share it.
Jennifer, before we hit a break, I want to go to Innocent Nemesis from YouTube. Will the probable cause affidavit be incriminating enough to compel Kohberger to plead guilty?
Oh, no, I don't think that's going to compel him to plead guilty. It's merely going to be a small part of their case, which is all that's required to meet the threshold of probable cause. Remember, there is so much more going on in this case after he was arrested. 4 search warrants and all the information that they're going to be looking at gleaned from there. No, he's going to want to see all of that before he would ever be compelled to make any sort of plea.
Okay, and I agree with you. I mean, it's going to have information, but not all of the information. It's not going to have as much completed information as we would have right before a trial. Now, I want to let you know what's going on. We've just gotten word that that extradition hearing has ended. We are going to get an update for you on what the status was and what we learned from that hearing. Now, what we're also going to do is take live any press conferences or any interviews that happen outside of that courthouse in Pennsylvania. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back, everybody. So we're covering the extradition of Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho college students back in November. We believe that that extradition hearing has just ended in Pennsylvania. We're going to get an update for you as we learn new information about it. But by all accounts, we believe that he waived extradition. This should be now a streamlined process to get him back to Idaho, where he's going to face these charges. We're taking your questions right now, and my expert panel is with us to talk a little bit more about it. One of the questions what we got, and I will actually answer this because I never get a chance to answer the questions. One of the questions that we got was, when was the last time we've seen the death penalty in Idaho? Because one of the surrounding questions is, Would prosecutors push forward with the death penalty here? Well, I can tell you, based on quick research, that there are 8 residents under the death penalty sentence in Idaho, and the most recent one is Jonathan Daniel Renfro, who received this prison sentence in November, received this death sentence in November 2017. He was convicted of first-degree murder for the shooting of a police officer. So it's an interesting question as we move forward. Now, if we get any press conferences, any interviews happening outside of that Pennsylvania courthouse, we'll make sure to jump live any second, but I do want to go back to my panel. Let me go to you, Dr. Goodman, on this. So one of the questions that we have, and there's been a lot about this, is about the father. And one of the questions that we have from Sandra Carter from YouTube: why did Kohberger's father need to go to Utah to drive him back to Pennsylvania? And this is also from Public Art Critic on YouTube. Has Bryan implicated his father? So seemingly people have questions about the family dynamic.
Right, and as do I. Again, I don't like to, Jesse, name the names of some of these killers who have preceded this suspect, but I've been involved in cases where we will have parents potentially, on the platforms express certainly their disbelief, their shock, their dismay, and also their compassion toward family. But if there is any involvement at all of any members of the family, the mother, the father, the 2 sisters, certainly there will be potential criminal charges against them. Now, another thought is, and I've been asked this question, why did he go back to the family? Well, one thought is, even in the most turbulent of circumstance in one's life and lifestyle, and we've seen that in other high-profile cases, these individuals tend to go back to the family. Why? Because seemingly there's unconditional love that a parent will have for a child. The 3 words, of course, I love you, but the other 3 words, no matter what.
On this topic of the family, and Jeanette, we have a question from For Such a Time as This for YouTube. By the way, a lot of deep, philosophical YouTube names. I have to second guess the one that I'm using. But anyway, the question that they have is, have they or will they search the parents' house since he was there and possibly stashed the weapon there, and Jeanette?
Bryan Kohberger was, Jesse, arrested at his parents' house in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania last Friday. It was around 1:45 in the morning, according to the district attorney there. So the house was searched last Friday. We actually had a photographer there as that process was unfolding. It's a gated community, so you couldn't get very close. So that home has been searched already. I do want to add about the parents, just from the last question. I had spoken with Jason LaBar over the weekend, the attorney, public defender representing Bryan Kohberger, basically for a few days during this extradition hearing in this matter. He told me that trip with the father flying out to Washington to drive back with Bryan Kohberger, he told me that the family told him that trip was planned before the school year started, that he would fly out and drive back with his son. So that appeared to be something that happened, that had been planned months in advance. And of course, it was Christmas break. Jason LaBar told me that this trip home occurred sometime between December 13th and December 16th. And so Bryan Kohberger was in the Washington state area until that point in time, of course, ending up in Pennsylvania with his family, driving home.
Okay, that's a good point to make about the timeline of events. We also have a question here, Jennifer, from Lauren Johnson-Nichols on YouTube. How is Kohberger going to be transported to Idaho? Typically, how do these extradition processes work? Could he drive? Could he fly? How does it work?
Well, typically on a long distance situation like this, we would transport on commercial. However, this is not anything typical. This is charges that are extremely serious and very well publicized case. So I would expect him to be transported by a contract airline, or I should say contract airplane, so a private airplane that would transport him back, and not to be at all in the public forum of a airport or a commercial landing strip, a large airport at all.
Yeah, I imagine him on a commercial flight would create a number of different issues and difficulties. So I agree. I don't think that's going to happen. We have a question here for you, Dr. Goodman, from Mariah from YouTube. Actually, yes, this is the question. Has there been any information released in a date or jury summons for a grand jury? I'll answer that no, way too early for that. The question I will ask for you, Dr. Goodman, about that is how on earth do you get an impartial jury in this case, in that state? This was a case that really took the nation by storm. To find people that don't know about it is one hurdle, but to find people who don't have any kind of pre-context or preconceived notions about it, you tell me what you think about it.
Sure. Well, again, another great question. And as somebody who's been involved in our field for 27 years, I do believe strongly in the jury process and what it's designed to do. So although it appears as though the whole world knows about the facts, and that would not necessarily be uncommon, Jesse, as we know with other high profile cases that literally just transcended, cities, states, and permeated countries. But with that regard, I like to believe that those who are selected for the privilege, the honor of participating in jury service can remove whatever potential knowledge they think they have or any preconceived thoughts and decisions and just listen directly to what will be happening in the court of law.
Yeah, and also, of course, there's the danger of people who want to get on that jury pool and want to make a statement. That's going to be a danger as well and difficult for his attorneys. We're still early in that process. And Jeanette, I know we have to sign you off. Dr. Goodman, I know we have to sign you off. And Jeanette, I'll get one quick thought from you as we progress in this case. What are you going to be looking out for as Kohberger, by all accounts, is transported back to Idaho, and what we can expect in the next week?
I'm looking forward to that probable cause affidavit being released, of course, as everyone else is. I do think he'll make it back here pretty quickly. I don't know exactly when, but I would think, too, it would happen by private plane. As Jennifer had mentioned, I actually interviewed a former U.S. Marshal today for Sidebar, the podcast we host, and he told me that, with a guy this high profile, Bryan Kohberger, this is a very high profile case, it likely would be on a commercial or on a private plane rather than commercial.
And that definitely makes sense given the circumstances of this. And Jeanette, great reporting. Stay warm. Go inside while you can before you have to jump out to do some more questions. And Jeanette, great reporting. Dr. Goodman, thank you so much for coming on. Jennifer and I are going to stay on. We're going to take more of your questions, and we are waiting for any kind of update outside of that Pennsylvania courthouse. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to the Law&Crime Trial Network, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We are here talking about the extradition hearing of Bryan Kohberger, the 28-year-old defendant suspect who has been charged in Idaho with the murders of 4 University of Idaho college students. Now, he was arrested in Pennsylvania, so it becomes a question of how he's going to be transported from one state to another. We believe that this extradition hearing has ended. We believe that he has waived his extradition, and now it'll be a question of how and when he returns back to Idaho to face these charges. We're going to be taking your questions on social media, so Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Get your questions in. We'll answer them to the best that we can here on here live on the next hour or so. In the meantime, as we wait to speak hopefully with Sierra Gillespie, our correspondent who's on the ground in Pennsylvania, I want to play something for you that you might have missed. So last week, upon the arrest of Kohberger, Bill Thompson, who is the Latah County prosecutor, spoke at this press conference, and here's what he had to say.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Bill Thompson. I'm the Latah County prosecutor. And it's sad to be here, but happy to be here at the same time. As Chief Fry indicated, a criminal complaint was filed yesterday here in Latah County, charging the defendant, Mr. Kohberger, with 4 counts of first-degree murder, in addition to felony burglary, which involves entering the residence with the intent to commit the crime of murder. Mr. Kohberger, and let me preface, there is a pending case now in court, and I and my office and the investigators have to live with the restrictions that our Supreme Court places on pretrial publicity. That said, I promise you we will share with you through the court process or otherwise whatever we are allowed to. I just appreciate your patience on that. The factual basis for the charges are summarized in what's called a probable cause affidavit that is on file with the court. According to the rules of the Idaho Supreme Court, that is sealed until Mr. Kohberger is physically back in Latah County and has been served with the Idaho arrest warrant. At that time, we expect that that affidavit will be available to you so you can share the true facts with all of your readers and your watchers and your listeners and all of the people who are interested and really need to know what's going on. So please have patience with us on that. We hope to get that to you as soon as we can.
Okay, so let's talk about what we're seeing here. And again, we're going to be taking your questions before we get to them. I am joined by retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who's been following this case since it began. Jennifer, before I get to what we're seeing here, I do want to let everybody know that we're getting some updates from our own Sierra Gillespie, who was inside that courtroom for the extradition hearing. It appears that Mr. Kohberger has waived his extradition, that he did this of his own free will. He was asked certain questions, preliminary questions about whether or not he was on any medication, if he knew what he was saying. He does. And now it appears that he will be extradited within the next 10 days back to Idaho, where he will ultimately face the charges. Now, I'll allow Sierra, once we get her on, to give some more details and context there. Jennifer, I want to give your perspective on what we heard from the prosecutor. So this is a prosecutor that got into a little bit of hot water at the beginning of this investigation for mixed messages about whether or not the house was targeted or whether or not the people were targeted. Now, he said something very interesting, that if you have questions about this, follow the court record. Follow the actual court record. Because, again, this case has been a lot about online sleuths, misinformation. What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, this prosecutor has a lot of experience, but he made a mistake early on, in my opinion, by fielding questions, very particular questions, when he could have just said, this is part of an ongoing investigation and I cannot answer that. Instead, he answered that question about targeting. And I don't think he wants to make any other mistakes, especially as we head into the prosecution stage of this case. So I think he was sending out a red beacon saying, listen, you can check the court records. That's where you're going to receive the information from this office.
And it's the right call. It's the right call to do that at this point. We have some questions. As I said, I want to go to Axel Santiago from YouTube. Question is, what DNA did he, meaning Kohberger, if guilty, most likely leave at the scene of the crime? Blood? Please explain. So, I mean, again, we don't know at this point, but what would you be looking out for?
Right. We don't know, but I would expect possibly a hair in this frenzied stabbing. You would expect possibly hair, sweat, saliva. as his mouth, opens and things like that, maybe even addressing his victims. It's also very possible, and we've seen it so often, an incidental cut on the perpetrator's arm, hand, so on and so forth, that could have also been left at that crime scene. So those are the four. There's also touch DNA, but I would anticipate he was gloved. So I wouldn't expect that as much, but it is possible, depending on the clothing he wore, that he could have extended his arm up and braced himself against a wall as he struck and provided some touch DNA there. We don't know, but those are some possibilities.
Yeah, and again, there have been reports that whether or not genealogical websites were used to ultimately track him down, like we saw with Jerry Birds, we saw with the Golden State Killer, that has yet to be positively confirmed yet, so we do want to know more information. Speaking about this probable cause affidavit that we wonder when will be released, and we'll learn new details about what led to the ultimate arrest of Bryan Kohberger. Again, it will not give us all of the details that we would have in, let's say, a prosecution with all the evidence, but it will give some probable cause about what led investigators to arrest him. Question we have from Nadia S. is, does Bryan get to know what is in the affidavit? Does his lawyer get to read it before it's unsealed for the public?
Oh, Bryan will absolutely, Mr. Kohberger will absolutely get to see what is in that affidavit. He has a right to see that. It would be unjust for that to be kept from him. We have the right as American citizens that if we are charged and taken into custody, we have a right to know why.
So let's now go to another question about what he's charged with. Desk Potato from YouTube. First have to say, the first step is admitting it. If you're a couch potato, if you're desk potato, first step is admitting it. So Desk Potato from YouTube. He's charged with first degree. Does that mean that they have to prove premeditation?
Yes, that does mean, but that doesn't mean that they can't charge with other lesser crimes at a later time. This tells me that they have a strong case to support first degree, meaning that he actually premeditated his actions.
And this is something that I should probably look into a little bit more. I believe he was also charged with burglary, right, Jennifer? Mm-hmm. And in some states, there's the felony murder rule, correct? So if someone dies in the commission of a felony, that too could be a way to get someone convicted. I'm not sure. I'd have to actually look at this probably in the break if I'm right about that here in Idaho, but that's something to consider as well. Now I want to go into a little bit more of your questions. Another question we have from Put the Fun in Fun, one from YouTube. Does the suspect have to arrive in Idaho to be served his warrant, or can they give it to him once he waives extradition? We all want to see those affidavits. Well, he has waived extradition, but tell us what you think about that.
No, he's going to have to be back in Idaho by their Supreme Court ruling. So we're not going to be able to see that affidavit anytime really soon, but I anticipate it by the end of the week.
I mean, you could be right. You could be right. I mean, we might know more information about that affidavit by the week's end. I do want to ask this question from Michael. Actually, no, this is a good one. This is from Anase TM from YouTube. Do you think that he was a serial killer in the making? Many of them seem interested in studying psychology and criminology. I will preface this by saying, once again, he is innocent until proven guilty. We don't know any motivations. But it does raise interesting questions that he appears at this point, we don't know the connection between him and the victims. If he's a complete stranger and his interest in study in criminology, it does raise certain questions, correct? So what do you stand on that?
Well, that's definitely so. Where I stand is law enforcement is going to have to do a deep dive into a myriad of crimes that might have been unsolved in the Pennsylvania area, such as burglary, such as missing persons, such as even homicides, possibly, assaults that have gone unsolved. The good thing is they have his DNA now, and they are going to definitely be running that through CODIS to see if there is any connections with some of these possible other crimes. But this is a very interesting question, and I think it's very plausible that he could have been involved in or a serial killer in the making, if you will. This is a mass murder Definitely. I mean, you have 4 victims. In other words, if he was looking for one individual and he had to get through 4, that's already a sign of his complete psychotic uh, dissociation, if you will, to commit those kinds of murders.
It's interesting you say that because we had a question from Sally Vella on YouTube who said, are there unsolved murders or missing people in Pennsylvania where he lived? I assume the presumption there is that perhaps he's guilty of more crimes than we know about, or he's implicated in other crimes that we know about. I want to ask you this from Real with Robo from YouTube. How is the examiner of the polygraph supposed to ask about the location of the blade? You spoke earlier about whether or not a polygraph would even be administered. I'll broaden that question to say, if he's interviewed by investigators, which by all accounts, I don't know the level of interaction he had with them at this point, but a question would be very interesting. How could they elicit that response from him about the location of the murder weapon? Because we do, at this point, do not have the murder weapon.
Right. In a polygraph examination, it's actually quite limited. There would only be 1, 2, 3 at the very most questions asked that would be part of the polygraph test. So a question could be, do you know where the murder weapon is? These questions need to be asked in a yes, no format. And but that would be one of the questions that could be asked. So that would be the initial question that I would ask as a case agent working with my polygrapher. That would be one of the questions I would ask. And then I would ask him to ask, did you dispose of the weapon? They have to be very simple questions for a polygraph case to, or polygraph examination to even have a chance at being successful.
Right, and whether or not he would ever voluntarily agree to submit to some sort of questioning like that. We have Michael Green from YouTube, Jennifer, who says, what evidence do you think they have that he committed burglary?
Well, if he committed these crimes, he committed burglary. He entered that residence without authority. And I agree with you, Jesse. I think that they, just in case a jury is not comfortable with, convicting him of these murders for some reason, again, he is completely innocent until proven guilty. But I'm saying, as is believed by law enforcement, that he committed these crimes. I think that proving he entered that residence, if indeed they had DNA, would be a much easier task.
And I know I sound like a broken record every time I say that he's innocent until proven guilty, but I will also explain why that is so important for the people who want to see him prosecuted. Obviously, we have a system of justice in this country, but you have to make sure you maintain that, because what could happen in an eventual trial is defense attorneys could say he never got a fair shake, that there was prejudicial evidence, that there was prejudicial jurors, and a potential conviction could be overturned. So what you have to do is preserve this prosecution as much as you possibly can from the minute this investigation happened to now and continuing on. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get more of your questions. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back. right, welcome back, everybody. So we're covering the extradition of Bryan Kohberger, the 28-year-old grad student from Washington State University who's been accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students. The hearing has ended. We saw Bryan Kohberger actually enter that courthouse hours before this extradition hearing. By all accounts, it appears that he has waived his extradition. The judge asked him if he is making this decision free and clear and of his free will, and that he was not on any kind of medications. He has indicated that is so. And now it appears that he will be transported back to Idaho within the next 10 days for this legal process to continue. And we will cover every second of it here on Law and Crime as much as we can. No cameras actually allowed in that courtroom. But what we are doing is waiting for any kind of update from outside the courthouse right now. We believe that there's a pre-scheduled press conference by the police at about 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. I'm keeping a very careful eye on that feed. As soon as we can jump live, we will. In the meantime, let me show you what Shannon Gray, who is the attorney for Kaylee Gonsalves' family, one of the victims in this case, what he had to say about the probable cause affidavit.
Well, we'd like to see it. They're not going to release it to us. I mean, I've asked for it right now, and they've not released it to us. They're stating Idaho state law that they can't release it until after the arraignment. And so we're honoring that. But you know, I'm just as anxious, and the family is just as anxious to see the probable cause affidavit as everyone else is. You know, hopefully it's a good probable cause affidavit. It's not going to detail everything that's in part of the investigation, but it will give a good basis about what possible evidence they have that connects the defendant in this case to the crime. So, and then, you know, maybe, you know, they can ask. I mean, I think that the real thing is that, you know, the community being involved and knowing and offering up additional details about any connections or anything like that. So,
see, here's the thing that I find so interesting, Jennifer, is how much do the families know? Do you imagine that they know more information? Let me rephrase. Do you believe that they're going to be, you know, updated to everything in this case when they read that probable cause affidavit like the rest of us, or do they know more information than we know? Because I know there was whole conversation earlier on in this case about what Stephen Gonsalves was told about the autopsy results and things of that nature. But typically speaking, how much are the families actually, you know, apprised of what's actually happening in the case?
Well, I think initially in this case, law enforcement did provide some details. We know they did. For instance, they provided the huge detail, in my opinion, about Maddie and Kaylee being in the same bed. Also, there was some discussion regarding the wounds that they suffered compared to one another. And so there were some details offered that certainly weren't public. And I believe after that information was disclosed publicly, that I think law enforcement was much more guarded as to what information they were going to give any of the parents. And that is quite usual, actually. They do not want to tip their hand. They're so worried about that information being leaked out. And the more people that know those details, the more chance that their investigation is going to be compromised.
So here's a question that we have from MF Errors, Magnet Fishers from YouTube. Do you think he got rid of the knife before or on the cross-country road trip with his dad? Again, we do not know where the suspected murder weapon is. We know that he went on this pre-planned cross-country trip with his father. People are wondering, is it possible he tossed it in the course of this trip, which make things very difficult, I imagine, for investigators to now search such a wide area. What is your take on it?
I don't expect that he tossed it. I think that he took care of that murder weapon. He realizes what that could mean if it was found. So I think he would have either buried it or put it in a river or otherwise concealed it someplace where it would be very difficult for anyone to find.
Jillian de Guvella from YouTube asks, reports say he wore gloves after the crime at the university and at the store in his hometown while under surveillance. Any indication of wounds on his hands?
I have heard of no indication of that, but again, with wearing gloves, that would be hard to see. Also remember, and I don't know if this was interiorly, but it's very cold there. So it doesn't surprise me that he was seen wearing gloves. Obviously, if they were inside, that would pose a different situation. But I know of no information that's been released by law enforcement or credible source that he has cuts on his hands.
By the way, talking about this weapon, we only speculated about what it might be. There was reports that it was a K-bar style knife, a Rambo style knife. I've heard mixed reaction in terms of what kind of weapon you would need to use, presuming it's one weapon and not two. What kind of weapon you would need to use to really brutally kill 4 people. Possibly there were defensive wounds as well, so someone was struggling. Do you think I'm right and that's the kind of knife we're looking for here?
Yes, I think we're looking for a large blade knife. I think he would have been smart enough and savvy enough to have a knife that had the guard. So as he was stabbing, there was no chance for his hand to slip down and to be cut by the blade. So I think we are looking for that sort of style of knife, not only based on my opinion, but also based on really the details of what the coroner said. That's the conclusion that could easily be drawn.
By the way, we keep showing this footage of Bryan Kohberger. This is from earlier today when he was actually brought into that courthouse. Again, this is the first sighting we've seen. We obviously have his mugshot from Friday, but watching this footage of him walking in is pretty chilling to see because so many weeks went by where we were just wondering who could have done this? Who is there to be? What suspect is there? And to see the main suspect walking in is pretty eerie and chilling. This is an interesting question about safety. Jill Sanford from YouTube asks, Jennifer, are they concerned about Bryan's safety? How often are presumed and guilty prisoners killed while in custody?
Well, it happens, and it is definitely going to be a concern with that correctional facility. It's also going to be a concern that he not escape. Bundy, as an example, escaped. I mean, there are very smart, I should say very savvy people that are often incarcerated, and they figure out different ways to escape facilities. So he will be highly guarded, both to protect him against himself, against others, and against escape.
RH from YouTube asks, Jennifer, do you think the defendant will get on the stand during the trial? So I'll take the lead on this first, and then I'll throw it to you. So early to determine that because we don't even know what a potential defense is. If I had to guess, I would say no. I don't think in these typical kind of cases, in these kinds of cases, it would benefit a defendant to take the stand. We usually see it in self-defense cases where sometimes a jury needs to understand why a person committed a killing. You know, it doesn't become a question of if they did it, it becomes a question of why they did it, and self-defense and reasonableness. I don't think he would do that in this case. It's so early to have this conversation. I throw it to you.
It is very early. I would have a slightly different take, Jesse. I think that if he saw the trial going along and was realizing it is a slam dunk case, their DNA is so strong, he, as a Hail Mary, I could see him insisting on getting on the stand. Again, we're dealing with a narcissist, thinking that he could possibly explain away the evidence that had been presented.
Talking about a trial, Araya from YouTube asks, do you think this trial will happen in Moscow or in Boise, Idaho? And wait, I think there's a, yes, okay. This is a follow-up question from Chris Lopez from YouTube. With the national attention that this has gained, would the trial be held in Latah County or be moved to Boise, such as in the Lori Vallow-Daybell case?
I would completely believe that this will have a change of venue, and I would expect it to be Boise, where there's a much larger jury pool. I think the defense will really work to have that happen, and I think a judge would definitely grant that motion.
Some of the questions that we've been seeing are about whether or not he was stalking the victims, right? So we don't know what the connection is between him and the victims, but what are you going to be looking out for? What do you think investigators are looking out for in terms of whether or not he had been surveilling these victims for quite some time, or something happened on the night in question? Because there had to be some way he identified them. Could you have said, I mean, again, is it a possibility? He saw a house, randomly went in and killed everybody, you know, I should say there were 2 surviving victims. Is that a possibility? Is it something about the house, or was it the victims? And if it's the victims, you'd have to imagine he saw them at some point. Again, he's innocent until proven guilty, but you'd have to imagine that saw them before they went into the house in the early morning hours of November 13th?
I think it's truly a combination. I think that the victims, being female, obviously, Ethan, I personally believe was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I believe this is a femicide type case and that he targeted them for that reason. But I think that this was very premeditated. And I believe that the House posed what we call a soft target. And he realized, not only do I have the victim type that I'm looking for, now I also have a soft target where people are going in and out, where I'm on a cul-de-sac, so there's not a lot of traffic, or cul-de-sac type area where there's not a lot of traffic, where I can be seen. There's a beautiful tree line here that I can hide behind. I can surveil it quite easily. I think all of this combined together made for a perfect storm of a target that was easy for him.
And a college town. People are out late, people are screaming, you know, it's not uncommon for people to come back late. He picked such a susceptible target, but also, you know, such an interesting and unique one, to say the least, or at least he allegedly did. This is what he's accused of doing. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll see if we can jump live to a press conference. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. So we're going to jump live right now to a press conference that's being held by the Pennsylvania State Police. This comes after the extradition of Bryan Kohberger. He will be extradited back to Idaho within the next 10 days. I believe the chief of police is speaking right now. Talked about how he never imagined that when the news broke about these 4 murdered college students, that it was going to end up all the way in Pennsylvania. They just talked about the arrest of Kohberger. Let's go live.
Moscow Police Department. Specific details regarding this investigation cannot be released until the suspect is extradited to Idaho and presented with the probable cause affidavit. At this time, I will turn the microphone over to Major Christopher Paris, commander of Area 3, who was involved in the coordinated efforts to take the suspect into custody.
Thank you, Colonel. Area 3 comprises troops F, P, N, and R, and is made up of 1,000 approximately of the women and men, civilian and enlisted, in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. I'd like to introduce to my left Captain Norm Kramer, who's the commander of Troop N Hazleton, which is comprised of Carbon, Monroe, Columbia, and parts of Luzerne counties. I would like to reiterate, as the Colonel said, that Idaho law prohibits any release of information contained within the affidavits. So we're going to do our best today to talk about what phase we are currently in the investigation, and it has entered a new phase with the waiver for extradition. And the continuing primary goal is the seeking of justice through successful prosecution and conviction, bearing the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So with that in mind, we're trying to balance essentially 2 things: the public's desire for information against the need to maintain the integrity of the investigation and protect the suspects, accused at this point's due process. So I'll now attempt to give you an operational picture with the best information I can release at the time. So this begins when the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation troopers were contacted by the FBI about assisting with surveillance of the accused in this case. I'd like to take the opportunity to specifically thank several individuals. Special Agent in Charge Jackie McGuire and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Dave Carter from the Philadelphia Field Division, as well as Supervisory Special Agent Bill Vigorito of the Scranton RA. We're very lucky in PSP to have a collaborative relationship with the Bureau, both in Pennsylvania and beyond, and their people are absolutely excellent. So as the investigation progressed, Troop N Criminal Investigation Section, commanded by Captain Kramer over my left shoulder here, began to collaborate with authorities in Idaho. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge Lieutenant James Curto, who is here today, Sergeant Anthony Ferdinand, Corporal John Chulak, who is not present with us, and Troopers Leary and Knoll, who are here with us today. It was through this collaboration and the charges pending in Idaho that those troopers were able to obtain search warrants and a fugitive from justice warrant that was prepared here in Monroe County for the location in Chestnut Hill Township and the fugitive from justice warrant for Mr. Kohberger, respectively. I'd like to acknowledge the Monroe County District Attorney, David Christine, as well as First Assistant Mike Mancuso and their entire office. The support that we received was absolutely excellent. Once those warrants were obtained, the Bureau of Emergency and Special Operations, BESO, coordinates our Special Emergency Response Team, CERT. They were selected to serve those warrants, the 3 search warrants and the fugitive from justice warrant. To define what CERT is, it's a full-time tactical team maintained by PSP to deal with high-risk warrant situations, barricades, and other incidents requiring specialized tactical training or other capabilities. From their perspective, we essentially task them to go out and serve a arrest warrant for someone accused of a quadruple murder. They're activated several hundred times a year throughout the Commonwealth. We don't typically hear of their work in a forum like this because they serve the warrant, the person's taken into custody, and they go about their assignment. They are the ultimate professionals. It's a volunteer team. They're highly trained and highly motivated. Captain Norm Kramer, over my left shoulder, was assigned as the top comm for the CERT activation, which means he was responsible for coordinating our tactical preparations. So, tactical assets were then staged in the county, in Monroe County, into the evening of Thursday, December 29th, last Thursday. And in the early hours of Friday, December 30th, those warrants were executed at the location. Mr. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. The scene was turned over to the FBI Evidence Response Team for processing. Mr. Kohberger was then turned over to the Monroe County Prison, where he has remained in their custody since. I'd like to thank the Monroe County Sheriff and the Stroud Regional Police Department for their support as well during the extradition process. Arrangements currently are being made to deliver Kohberger back to Idaho, where he can have continued due process and face these charges. So it's with that I will turn it over to First Assistant Mike Mancuso.
Thank you, Major. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Mancuso with the DA's office, the First Assistant District Attorney. I want to give my condolences to the families of the victims out in Idaho for their loss. It's my sincere hope that this marks a clear step in the right direction of effectuating justice for those folks. My office's role was relatively recent. We weren't advised of the presence of the defendant in our county until only a couple days before the apprehension of the defendant. But when we were told, we came together and worked very closely with Captain Kramer, who did an excellent job in almost like a clockwork operation. Part of my duties were to ensure that 3 separate search warrants were issued. Those affidavits attached to those search warrants are still under seal, so I can't discuss their contents with you. But one was for the person of Mr. Kohberger, collecting DNA and photographs, that sort of thing. One was for the white Elantra vehicle, which I understand has been seized and is being processed. And one was for the address, the residence itself that he was living in with his family. I was at the scene, and I have to say that Major Paris and Captain Norm Kramer did an outstanding job in coordinating the efforts, not only of the numerous Pennsylvania State police troopers there, but officers from other jurisdictions and disciplines within those jurisdictions to make this a very smooth, highly competent professional operation. It is a quirk, apparently. It's not in the norm of the states I'm familiar with that Idaho does not release their probable cause affidavit in support of their arrest warrant until after their defendant is brought or returned to that state. But having read those documents and the sealed affidavits of probable cause, I definitely believe that one of the main reasons the defendant chose to waive extradition and hurry his return back to Idaho was the need to know what was in those documents. So that's a significant development. Beyond that, looking at the scope of the situation and the ties this defendant has to my county, I would hold our office at the disposal of the Idaho authorities to help facilitate a complete background investigation into the defendant, both activities prior to the murders occurring within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and his activities after the murders in Pennsylvania. So we stand ready to assist with that effort on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
We can now open it up for questions.
Can you tell us what state police specifically did, or can you give us any indication as to the operations of state police, when you were notified? And you talk about putting tactical in the area. How long were they there? And what's the...
We're not in a position to give you an exact time. It was at some point prior to when the surveillance was taken as the investigation progressed to a point where search warrants could be obtained and the probable cause for those search warrants and an arrest warrant, a fugitive from justice warrant based on the arrest warrant out in Idaho were obtained. We began to take the tactical steps to plan to serve them.
Were you collecting evidence prior to his arrest?
At this point, like we said, it's very much pertinent to what's in the affidavits, which we cannot speak about.
What's known about his demeanor when the arrest actually happened?
Present sense impression, as likewise ongoing investigation, can't discuss it.
How, Rob Van, 69 News, how is Kohberger being transported back to Idaho?
Those arrangements are being discussed right now, as well as the logistics. The court order says, those of you who heard it today, it's within the next 10 days, so we're currently working on that in coordination with authorities out in Idaho. Sir?
The defendant's mother in the courtroom.
I can't comment. I don't know.
Is he being held in the Monroe County Jail until he's extradited, or was he removed to another?
No, he is lodged in the, since he was dropped off there Friday morning, he's resided in Monroe County Prison.
But still, until he's
Correct,
extradited,
yes.
he'll be there?
Are the marshals moving him, or which group is
At this
moving
point,
him?
that's still being coordinated between the state police and the authorities out there. We don't know.
Will the affidavit be unsealed when he arrives in Idaho?
I don't want to speak out of my lane. When I watched the press conference on Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I was alerted to the fact that, according to Idaho state law, that the affidavits have to be served to him once he's extradited back before they could be unsealed.
Did he say, has anyone else been arrested?
Ongoing investigation, ma'am.
Has a motive been determined?
I can't comment on that either. I apologize.
Who transports him, sir? Does Pennsylvania State Police, the Monroe County Sheriff's Department?
He's presently back. He was transported from the courthouse by Monroe County Sheriff, and the logistics of who's going to transport him out to Idaho are still being discussed. We don't know yet.
Can you confirm the time of his arrest and how much law enforcement presence there actually was?
I would say it was in the early morning hours of Friday, December 30th. Tactical assets on scene were probably in the neighborhood of 50.
Were you afraid he was going to get tipped off before you got him?
I would say overall about this entire operation, and the credit goes, this is a part that the state police played humbly. You look at Moscow Police Department, 38 sworn, 19,000 leads, the video evidence that they had to develop in order to put that out, all public source information. But when you talk about the service of a high-risk warrant for someone who's committed or alleged to have committed 4 homicides, there's nothing routine about that. And all of those tactical steps that were taken were in conjunction with the best efforts of the authorities, local, state, and federal, both in Idaho and here, to ensure that we could do it safely and to ensure that we could get him into custody and that those service of the search warrants could occur.
Sir, can we ask a question of the First Assistant District Attorney? Mr. Mancuso, you described having read to a degree the contents of that affidavit of probable cause, and that you possibly speculated or theorized that he wanted to get back to read that as well, since he can't read that. Can you give us an indication, though, of the seriousness of what you did read? I know you can't talk about it, but can you share with us something?
Yeah, I can't get into the details, sir, but I can say it involved the defendant's connection to a scene of a crime consisting of 4 murdered people. So that's the significance of it.
Can you confirm that there is a connection between Bryan Kohberger and any of the victims?
I can't discuss that, ma'am.
How confident are you that he is guilty of these crimes?
That wouldn't be my place to say. Certainly confident enough that there was ample probable cause for the issuance of the various warrants in the case.
What was your reaction when you heard this? You've all talked about you followed this. This happened states away. When you get that call, or you all get the call, that this person could be right here in your home area, what's your reaction?
Well, I was surprised. Really, Monroe County, of all places, it hits close to home. It's a normal human reaction, I would think, under the circumstances.
Do you know when he and his father left Idaho or Washington and drove to Pennsylvania, what that date was?
No, I don't know the exact date, ma'am.
Approximately, we understand the middle of December, is that correct?
I think that's approximate.
And what about, we had heard reports that they were stopped not once but twice on the highway. Can you elaborate?
I'll defer to his Pennsylvania public defender on that.
Do you have reason to believe that Kohberger is connected to other crimes and unsolved mysteries in the area?
I wouldn't answer that question at this time.
You start looking at some that may be unsolved where he was around.
That would be a normal thing to do.
Question for the PSP here. Said he was taken without incident. Was it safe to say that, I shouldn't say it's safe to say, but did it seem like he was expecting?
I wouldn't comment on what his present sense was. I would just comment that the professionalism of the CERT team and their tactical training definitely proved in a situation like this to do it in the most tactically sound and fastest way possible.
Was there anybody else in the house at the time?
His parents were in the house at the time.
Did they say anything to you?
Again, present sense impression. I can't comment on that. Ongoing investigation.
He went down the door.
Force was used. The warrants were issued for evening search warrants, which in Pennsylvania requires additional probable cause in order to serve them at the hours of darkness. I would defer to the first assistant to talk about the legal burden that you bear in order to obtain those. But from a tactical standpoint, based upon all of the briefings that we had developed and all of the intelligence we had developed, we thought that was the best time to serve it.
And what tipped off that Pennsylvania was involved with this?
We were alerted by the FBI. Troopers in the Bureau of Criminal Investigation were alerted.
Anything on like his social media pages that tipped anything?
I can't comment. I don't know.
So has parents been cooperative in this whole process?
Can't comment. Ongoing, like I said. The state police's role here was to serve the warrants and assist with the surveillance, which we've done. We've been part of major investigations. You know, these are men and women who take an oath to protect their communities and the Commonwealth here. We're very humbled with the opportunity that we had, given a case that has really gained international attention, to play a small part in it. And our hat is off to Moscow PD, again, with the size and the complexity of this investigation and the work that they've done to get us here today. And this is only the beginning of the next step.
If it's determined that anyone here in Pennsylvania either helped to conceal or dispose of any evidence, then you would be a part of this case, or would it go to...
I would say that we would pledge whatever support we can for ongoing investigations with the Idaho authorities here in Pennsylvania. Absolutely. We would help them in any way we could.
Were there any weapons found in the home?
I don't want to get into what was actually seized in the house pursuant to the evidentiary nature of it.
Can you give any insight into why you all decided to go in overnight to make the arrest?
Those are tactical decisions in terms of base surveillance. I don't want to give out too many tactical factors that go into that situation, but obviously surveillance was conducted, and we wanted to go in at a time when we thought it would be the safest for everybody, safest for anybody else in the house, safest for Mr. Kohberger, and safest for our people.
There was an interesting question asked earlier about the care that needed to be taken to not tip the suspect off. Could you describe how long that lid had to be on things, and how many people were involved in it? Like, how many people knew and for how long?
So I would say, I would answer the question this way. I don't want to get into a timeline in terms of when we were notified by the FBI and when the surveillance began. Obviously, we know on Thursday night into Friday morning is when the warrants were served. I would say, as a credit to the professionals both standing behind me and others not here, many others not here, the information was held very close, and we did not want to have any situation where Mr. Kohberger potentially would be tipped off. So as a result of that, I would say a close number of approximately 7 to 8 individuals, maybe 10 on the most within the PSP side of this operation knew about it.
And for days, can we say? Or?
I would say for a period of time. I would not feel comfortable commenting any more than that, for a period of time. And then as the tactical assets were brought in, people were briefed.
When the movement plan is finally decided, will there be an announcement?
Not from the state police, so we would defer to Moscow and the authorities in Idaho.
When he starts leaving Pennsylvania?
Well, we have security concerns now, obviously, to move any prisoner. Anytime you move somebody from a secure prison to another place, we don't want to, there won't be an announcement from the state police in terms of those logistics, but they're being worked on right now.
Can you give us your best guess when you think he might be moved, roughly? Tomorrow?
We would like to do it as soon as possible, but the court order says 10 days. We have 10 days to coordinate it.
Can you potentially be on a plane tonight? Is it possible he could be on a plane tonight? That's a possibility, right?
I can't, I would think that's probably not likely.
A private plane, or would you fly commercially?
We're looking into that right now.
Can you confirm or deny that a window was broken in order to gain access into the home?
There were multiple windows that were broken, I believe, to gain access, as well as multiple doors. I think the video of the house after the fact confirms that. And that would all be part of the tactical plan based on the floor plan of the house, et cetera, and what the CERT operators would do to serve those warrants.
Was this suspect on your radar before, and are you looking at any connections?
I wouldn't comment on that based on the ongoing nature.
But how about did he have a criminal past? According to the UJS, I didn't see anything.
I can't comment on a person's criminal history during an ongoing investigation.
Sorry, Mr. Mancuso said that you stand ready to assist in giving a complete background of the defendant. What specifically is law enforcement interested in?
That'll be the last question after Mr. Mancuso answers.
In any case of this nature, and I prosecuted a fair share of homicides, double homicides, that sort of thing, You want to look at any evidence of possible motive. You want to look at any evidence of a pattern, of modus operandi or method. You want to get into the subject's character, mental state to the best you can, that sort of thing. So it'll be an all-encompassing effort, which we stand ready for. Okay.
How will you do it?
We have our ways. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Just for a quick
All right, welcome back, everybody. I believe we have with us Law and Crime's own Sierra Gillespie, our correspondent on the ground in Pennsylvania. Sierra, what a day. Tell us what you saw, what you observed inside that courtroom during Bryan Kohberger's extradition hearing.
Yeah, Jesse, this extradition hearing was something to be seen. I will tell you, when Bryan Kohberger arrived into the courtroom, he was wearing a red jumpsuit, he had his hands cuffed, and you could have heard a pin drop. All eyes were on him, and the room was filled with media. Kohberger, though, he avoided eye contact with the media and just looked at his family that was seated in the front row. For majority of the hearing, though, he was actually standing, and he seemed pretty confident. His voice didn't stutter when he spoke. He seemed relatively calm, and he answered all of the judge's questions very eloquently, as though he understood what he was saying. And again, he said that he's waiving this extradition, so he voluntarily wants to go back to Idaho.
Sierra, did he make any kind of motion towards his family that was in the courtroom?
Yeah, Jesse, I'm glad that you pointed this out. So on the way in, he kind of nodded at his family, just kind of a somber thing. I realize you're here. But on the way out is really when he showed his cards. He mouthed the words, "I love you," to his family, and then he was escorted out of the courtroom. And actually, his family had quite a reaction when they were there. They were kind of hugging each other, touching each other. Actually, one family member was crying so much that a sheriff's deputy brought over a box of Kleenexes so that she could kind of make sure to contain herself a little bit more. And she actually covered her face with her hands when the first-degree murder charges were brought up. So very emotional from Kohberger's family.
And when we deal with these kinds of cases, it's families from both sides that are ultimately affected, not just the victim's family members, but clearly the defendant's family members as well. Sierra, great reporting on the ground for us. We really do appreciate it. You're our eyes and ears there. We didn't have cameras in that courtroom, so thank you so much, Sierra. Great reporting.
Yeah, thanks as always.
All right, everybody. So we are beginning. Thank you for joining us here on the covering of the extradition hearing of Bryan Kohberger. We will continue to follow this case as it ultimately progresses. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Law and Crime Network. We'll be back next time.